Negative. I asked earlier before the meeting. I'm satisfied with it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Cody.
Thank you.
Okay, Julie, we'll open public comment on this item.
I have no public comment for this item.
Okay, we will now close public comment and bring it back to council. Would anyone like to make a motion on this item?
I'll motion to accept the proposal, item 11.1.
Okay. We have a motion and a second, Julie. Roll call, please.
Mayor Pro Tem Smith,
Yes, thank you, Cody, for the overview.
Councilmember Chiara,
Yes.
Councilmember Haney,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Mayor Barrios.
Yes, this item passes 5-0. Thank you. Item 11.2, receive an update on the Stanislaus River Salmon Habitat Restoration Project.
Great, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. The item before you is to talk about the river restoration project at the Stanley Wakefield Wilderness Area. And I think it was in 2018, the city was awarded a grant for the initial phase, and we're fortunate to have Rocco Brown with Kramer Fish Sciences. He's going to give the bulk of the presentation. But the main reason why we're here is to provide an update and also to inform you that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Department Services has offered us additional funding to continue the project forward, and so we're seeking authorization to pursue those funds. So with that, Rocco, thank you for being here.
Excellent, thank you. Give a clicker.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Mayor. All right, quick little outline over here that I'm just going to talk about. It's really just bring us back to ground in terms of why salmon are important, some of the impacts in the Central Valley. I think we're all well aware of, but just a brief recap. Timeline for the project, talk a little bit about specifics of the Stanislaus River, existing conditions, some of the opportunities, our current design, and what things are going to look like as we try to move forward. So Central Valley Chinook salmon, one of the marquee species of the Stanislaus River here, have this really amazing life cycle, right, where they return home, starting with adults. They spawn in gravelly beds. They have these little tiny fry that basically, as they emerge in the top right there, you'll see they have a yolk sac. They basically live in the gravel for a few months, come out as juvenile fish, and then they need somewhere to grow and get big before they go out through the delta and into the ocean and return. Turns out that a lot of those habitats for rearing for young fish are severely lacking. We all understand that dams block fish from going upstream. It's not rocket science, right? But for the smaller fish, they need areas that are shallow, that are slow moving, that have food, and also that aren't ripe with predators, right? A lot of those areas are lacking in the Central Valley, especially on the Stanislaus River. 2018, I got a timeline that I'll show. We applied for a grant with the city of Oakdale to plan and design a habitat restoration project at the Stanley Wakefield Wilderness Area or the Kerr Park Wilderness Area. Primary goal was to plan and design a channel and floodplain restoration project for spawning and rearing habitat. And then our objective was to provide design drawings that ultimately could be implemented so the vision could be realized in the real. So timeline, the top bar is what we've been through, essentially phase one. So we applied for a grant March 2018 from CDFW. We awarded it July 2019. From September 2019 through June 2020, we did baseline studies. So these were things like mapping the topography, the bathymetry, mapping wetlands, tree species, all sorts of stuff like that to help us understand what's there. January through April 2020, we developed and evaluated different alternatives. We also conducted public outreach, albeit virtual, given COVID and whatnot. And then once a final alternative was selected, we moved forward to preliminary design. Right now, we've just submitted what we call 65% design, so things are pretty well along. We're hoping to wrap up the design portion by the summer. At that point, the grant would run out and the project doesn't have funding. So as Brian mentioned, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is well aware of this project. It's sort of a marquee need for the river by multiple agencies. They already had money sort of earmarked that if the city is willing to accept, would help us move forward into phase two, which would include permitting, implementation, and then monitoring. And the timeline for phase two would be determined once the funds are accepted. So A little bit about the Stanislaus River. I got some aerial imagery of the wilderness area that's kind of cycling through one topographic map. This river's been highly impacted, right? And one of the things we can see as we start at 1916 here is that pretty pristine, and then you start to see these scars in the landscape that I'll try to pause on here. Yeah. All right, I don't know if I understand how to use pause on here. Apologies.
Want to tell Brian?
Right, 1937, right there is perfect too. Actually, this works too, Brian.
Okay.
Thank you. So when we look at this topographic map, this thing's been altered, most likely through some type of gravel or sand mining, right? Those little scars, it almost looks like somebody clawed at the landscape, probably from dragline mining. When you look at the historical imagery, all of the vegetation that we see there, especially the big cottonwood trees, are in those little wells, if you will. We don't see any new recruits of cottonwoods or any other riparian trees that can be indicators of riparian health. And why is that? Well, there was a dam built in the 70s, right, that I'm sure we're all aware of. This thing's been locked in place since then, and so this project has the potential to undo over 100 years of damage and put this in a state that's not only good for fish, right, but also so that the city and the residents can enjoy it and make it a part of their amenities. And that's really one of the big opportunities here that I get personally excited about. So as a different effort, we're working on with the Fish and Wildlife Service to plan habitat restoration for juvenile salmon. The Stanley Wakefield Wilderness Area is one of the largest available parcels for this type of work. It really meets the spirit of the grants and the fundings that are out there, but I think also too, there's a tremendous opportunity to integrate with the City of Oakdale's long-term vision for parks. And then also too, again, folks can use this space more and interact with it more in a more natural state. So some of the constraints when we do projects like these are that we're in a degraded landscape, right? We also have had feedback from landowners across from the river who have had a lot of concerns about removal of vegetation, increased public access. There's a number of homeless encampments, and as you're all aware, they have started fires, in the past couple of years too. And then another constraint is really part of our mantra of do no harm. So a lot of those large trees that we talked about, we don't want to wipe everything out and create a sandbox, if you will. We want to work within the template that's given to us. What I have right here is a topographic map of our current design. And there's really sort of three main elements. Starting at the top here, what we call these terrace side channels. These are about 20-foot wide channels that are basically meant for the smallest of fish there, or fry. And then the center of this is the wetland. So the wetland is existing. It's actually a byproduct of some of the alterations historically. But what we're planning on doing here is enhancing that and actually increasing the extent of it. And a big driver for that is in the Central Valley, 90 to 95% of our wetlands have been lost. This is one of the few emergent wetlands on the Stanislaus River that one could actually restore. So it's a pretty amazing resource, if you will, given the rest of the river corridor. Another feature here is this side channel that would come through. That's going to have a 20 to 30 foot bottom width. And a key thing about this is that these areas are going to get wet seasonally, right? And so the polygons that we have here, the 670 CFS all the way up to 4,200, above 600 CFS, that's relatively rare. I mean, you're talking water releases by the Bureau of Reclamation, pulse flows for fish, things like that, big water years where we don't have dam storage, very infrequent.
CFS.
Sorry?
CFS.
Sorry, cubic feet per second. Yeah, so it's a measure of volume of water moving per time. So, yeah, and some of the benefits here, you're going to have a more natural and restored ecosystem for the residents of Oakdale. I mean, if you go out to the wilderness area now, it's basically like you're going through sort of hummocks from those dragline ridges. A lot of invasive plant species such as blackberry. And again, a lot of the beautiful trees there are really not recruiting either. So even if you don't care anything about fish, right, the current set configuration of the landscape really is not sustainable, right? Looking at creating about 10 acres of rearing habitat, and given that we have salmonids as a marquee or keystone species, tremendous amount of outside funding available from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the United States Fish and Wildlife, National Marine Fisheries Service. Pretty much all the state and federal agencies think that the Stanislaus is important for protecting and enhancing rearing habitat for fish. I think some other things here, management of vegetation. So we're going to plan on removing all of the Himalayan blackberry. Hopefully from things being wet more frequently, it does not come back, right? But that's really kind of an unknown. And then also too, the fact that water is going to get out there more frequently, we're going to actually have the opportunity for seedlings of cottonwood trees and other riparian species to start replenishing the forest that is out there. So just looking forward a little bit, you know, a big question when we do projects like this is like, oh gosh, what's it going to look like? You're going to come in there with heavy equipment and you're going to, you know, mess things up and nothing's going to grow back. Construction projects like this obviously are messy. These are photos from a project done about a half a mile downstream on River Right off of Rodden Road. And the bottom photos are obviously showing where the equipment's coming in and clearing and cutting side channels. And then the top pictures are showing what it looked like. The one on the left is immediately after construction. The one on the right is about a year after construction. Plants, fish, you know, they're very resilient. They're gonna take advantage of this space once it's created. Similar photos right here of this Rodden Road project. This pre-construction shot here is just, you know, covered in blackberries. I mean, you really couldn't even, push through there. Post-construction, things are bare. A year after construction, you got native wildflowers and grasses growing. So pretty quick succession with that disturbance. And then last but not least, well, I got one more slide, but obviously got a lot of really great technical information to share and just enthusiasm for the project. So I got my contact information if anybody's interested. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight here is that, you know, the city has put in some work to looking at what this space could be for its residents. And the fact that this particular project is going in there with heavy equipment and doing grading and clearing and things like that brings you one step closer to some of these other amenities, such as the park access plan and some of the features that you have shown here.
And if I could talk a little bit about that, and Rocco, thank you so much for the presentation and for your efforts in helping this going forward. But as was mentioned, it starts with the river restoration and it generates interest among these state and federal agencies. And so after we get this restoration, we believe that a future plan and future grant funds could be applied for, and we think we have a good chance of getting them to now increase access around the wilderness area, because right now you just have to be really, really good at crawling through blackberry bushes. And so if we can have trails, I can imagine school buses of children, walking these trails, kayakers having a safe place to come in and out of the river. It's truly a jewel that we have that is underutilized, and we think that this is the best way to get to where we want to go, where potentially you could have increased investment in that area, which brings more folks, which hopefully brings additional revenue and activity that allows us to do upgrades at Kerr Park, where you have the fields and, imagine families, catching a ball game and then enjoying the river, and all that kind of goes hand in hand. RV access and other stuff that ultimately I think will be an amenity that many of our citizens would really, really enjoy. So anyway,
And
yes.
This won't have any negative impact, will it, on the Sportsman's Club? They had that suit like 7 years ago with the EPA or whatever.
I don't believe so. I'm not familiar with their situation, but I mean, they have a right to operate, and if they're going to be shut down, it's not going to be from us. I mean, so I don't know all those rules and regulations that.
It looked like it's at Kerr Park, so it doesn't look like it's going to be there, but I just want to make sure. And then the neighbors that we talked about too, if they decided to oppose this, the people that have river access, would we still be able to do this, or would they be able to have an argument?
I think like any project, they have an opportunity to oppose the project. We don't want this here. And, as we go forward, they will have other opportunities to oppose these type of projects. you know, it's a public river, access to the river. So we're really not changing anything other than, I mean, it's a wilderness area, but there's been plenty of wilderness areas that have been modified so that people can actually see the wilderness area. I can think of a couple, like Yosemite, other national or state parks that have been, I mean, there's not many locations anymore that we can even do these type of things. But yeah, they'd have, I mean, and they can lobby council members and others, say, we don't want to do this. I mean, they can do that.
What's our timeline if we green light this? How long would this?
Well,
Yeah.
Rocco, could you kind of go through that timeline?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, basically, you know, again, we just submitted 65% engineering design, so over on the right here, we're gonna be making some modifications to get to, 100%. At that point, our funding runs out, and then if this funding was picked up, however long it would take to get contracted, we would start environmental permitting. That would take roughly a year and a half, hopefully a year. Then the next stage would be getting funding for implementation. To implement the project of this size, given the earthwork, probably a season, so you're talking in maybe another year, and then it would be monitored after that. And I think, you know, another component of all this that we originally envisioned was that hopefully, you know, the residents of the city can help us plant it and really make it a learning laboratory for them too, right? So like I think Brian said, it becomes this amenity that's yours. That right now it's there. It's really hard to realize in this degraded state right now.
And one of the things we've learned is that the best way to combat some of the things we don't like about some of these spaces is to make it more easily accessible by law-abiding, rule-following adults and children and families. We've seen that at the Valley View Access Trail, that because of the participation of the neighbors in the regular use, just this Friday or Saturday, we took some friends up there and we walked down, and it was a short little hike. And I was surprised at the number of people there, you know, kids coming down, adults, another couple was just hanging out. And when you have that type of environment, the transients or homeless don't have the opportunity to stake claim on that and dig into the hill or under the bushes or whatever it is. And we want to help these folks as much as possible, but we also want to make sure that we can have an amenity that will be beneficial. So when I look at this area, we think this will be an enhancement that maybe the residents don't necessarily across the river know that it will be an enhancement, because they also are calling, complaining about the homeless starting fires and other stuff. So this will help us, you know, mitigate that to some degree. And I think it'll also provide access to the 24,000 residents of Oakdale to have a nice amenity to visit whenever they choose. So that's kind of our thought process.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I think this sounds amazing, and having kids that go to Knights Ferry and the asset that we have just as an educational ecosystem up there is amazing. I can't think of anything that probably plays a bigger part, or maybe there's a couple of things, but there's not much that plays a bigger part in history of Oakdale besides the river. I mean, obviously that's why people came and settled here. So to be able to appreciate that and restore it is kind of cool, I think. I think it sounds really, really interesting. My only concern, I guess I share with Councilmember Smith, is the gun range, because my family also utilizes that, so I'd like to be able to do both, I guess.
We're actually not planning on doing any work next to the gun range and all, but I think with Brian, I can't really see how that would affect the project at all. I mean, yeah.
Let's see.
Man, this is
Could be
Curtis.
naive, but yeah, I don't see how that would affect it.
Can anybody hear me here? This is Curtis.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Rocco, for the presentation. On the surface, this looks like a really cool deal. I agree. I could envision going down there myself. I have several questions and concern. Can you expand in just 30 seconds or so, give or take, you said we can enjoy. This would be set up and then folks could walk through and enjoy that area, Could people fish up and down the river in that area, et cetera?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, right now, I mean, I can tell you from surveying out there a few weeks ago, if you're willing to go through Blackberry, I can think of a choice word, but I won't say it here. You could try to enjoy it, but you know, not so much unless you got a blowtorch with you. But then you got to worry about starting a fire. So yeah, and I think, you know, even before the city's longer term vision, like what's shown on the screen here, happens, the access roads that are being selected to actually do the work, you know, those will be trails, right? I mean, it's not like we're going to go out there and rip them up and, you know, prohibit people from going out there. So part of the stone will be set, if you will, from that. So yeah, I think there's going to be tremendous opportunities for folks to recreate out there and fish if they like.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
My concern is what, if any, strings are attached that come with this? In other words, will this give a foothold down the year, maybe years down the line? We've seen how many agencies, state, takes opportunities like this to shut down existing, whether it be businesses or ranches, or, for instance, the Sportsman's Club there. I'm educating myself. I'm just learning about this, but my concern is could this be a foothold? We've already seen folks use a clause in the EPA to chase after and sue and try to shut down. It's already been tried to shut down once in the past, at least that I know of, the Sportsman Club, and I'm concerned about this being a foothold potentially in the future to do that. And your guys' word of, well, I don't think it will, sounds good, but it won't really hold up in court. Tom, I have a question. What are your thoughts on that? Should we look into that more? I'm wondering if we should take potentially even push this back to another meeting, just so I personally, and maybe a few others, can get a little bit more information on it. Like I said, the project looks really cool. I just want to make sure we don't get ourselves in a bind.
I'm not aware of any time crunch.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a time crunch.
Yeah.
However, here's just the reality. It's not as if this area is hidden from the state and federal government. And so I really appreciate the thoughtful question that Councilmember Haney has, because we all have that. We've all had experience or seen where the state and federal government has maybe overstretched and taken away something that we used to be able to do. The Sportsman's Club, the risk of the Sportsman's Club has, in my opinion, has nothing to do with this project. It's on the radar. And so if the state or federal government has some method to do something with the Sportsman Club, in my opinion, it's not going to be tied to us trying to beautify and restore the river. They're just going to come in with extreme environmental reasons and get rid of it. But I don't think because of this, they will get rid of that. They will get rid of that because they'll come up with some other reason that lead or other stuff is tied to that and you're too close to the river. So I think it's a really fair question to ask. And as I mentioned earlier to him, is, of course, I can't guarantee anything in the state of California because I've seen some crazy, crazy things. However, I think the risk is really low in us losing something because especially in the area where we're talking, nothing's being done there. So other examples that we've talked about is like a rancher or something has been encouraged to take some funding from the EPA to do some improvements, and then next thing they know, they can no longer farm like they used to farm. In this particular case, it's just a barren, not utilized wilderness that the worst case scenario, in my opinion, is that they would be able to now benefit. Our residents would then be able to benefit from being able to travel around that. The other alternative is we do nothing, and it'll continue to just to be a decaying wasteland with no hope for restoration. So,
And then can I just add to that, Brian, about the Sportsman's Club as well? Because that is always a concern. They got hit kind of hard with the EPA years back. However, the improvements and the money that they spent on that facility met the EPA requirements. So that's something to think about. That they're,
If
they
I
are-
could add to this too, you know, we had residents again at Rodden Road that accepted funding, and one of their first questions was, is this the government going to come in and tell me what I can and cannot do with my property? And nobody's told them what to do. I'm not a legal expert, but my understanding is this funding is for habitat restoration. It's sort of take it or leave it, but there are no clauses associated with that you need to then manage the land any differently than it would be.
So one of the things, the question was, can we push this out to another meeting? We absolutely can. And if the council feels more comfortable doing that, I do know that the representative from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is saying, hey, let me know, thumbs up, thumbs down, and we told them that we were meeting today. I'm sure 2 weeks, you know, wouldn't necessarily change anything, but I guess I don't know what type of information I would bring back to the council that would be any different than the information I've shared with you today.
Yeah.
I'd agree with Brian on that.
And we're just like okaying funding, right? Or seeking a grant.
Yeah, so basically,
Hey, before we
Yeah, go
go
ahead.
on, I got a few things. Number one, can you go back to the funding timeline, please?
What was the grant, 300,000?
341,000.
41?
Has anybody talked to the people in the country club out there?
Who's talking?
Me.
Okay, I'm talking right now. Can you just hold on to your thought for a second, please? $341,000 we've already been given. We're already using, does that cover both of these lines or just the upper line?
The upper line.
Okay, so the upper line. So right now, we spent that 341,000 to map it all out. We haven't put any shovels in the ground
Well,
yet.
yeah, map it, engineering design, exactly.
Okay, and so right now, the point of this proposal, or this presentation tonight, is to get that second $341,000 to progress with the fund. So by pushing it off 2 weeks, I don't see us saying, no, we don't want an additional $341,000 for this incredible amenity for Oakdale here. Because the EPA or the federal government might come over and shut down this firing range. I say more salmon and less parking lots. I'm all for this project. I think it's a great, incredible thing. Like Councilmember Chiara said, our kids have all gone to Knights Ferry to go look at the salmon. What if they can go, 1 mile east of town on these walking trails that we're talking about, and have these viewing stations of our own? I just want to say thanks to the people in the departments who hunted these grants down, because they don't fall out of trees. We had to look for them, we had to find them, we had to sign up for them. 341,000 for wetland restorations. That's a good chunk of money, and doubling that is pretty impressive. So thank you very much for the presentation. And Mayor, if you want to have a public comment, that's fine.
Thank you. Any other council members have questions?
I'm going to agree with Christopher on this. We're asking for some money right now. I think it would be a poor decision to not, because you're going to ask for the money. You're going to say, yeah, we want this, and it's not like we can't make a few phone calls in the meantime.
Well, and I think it is important to note that it's money coming from the federal government that's earmarked specifically for these kinds of purposes. It can't be used for something else.
Okay.
I have one additional question. Like I said, I think it's a really neat project, and if and when it happens, I will probably be right down there with my son and daughter and wife to enjoy it. Is there any way we can get some sort of written confirmation that this cannot be used down the road, or something to satisfy me, or I don't know if there's any other council members that have the concerns I have, that this can in turn be used, like, oh, there's fish habitat beds right next to you, and you guys are, you have lead flying out, and suddenly lead has become the enemy. And is there any confirmation of that available? And that's my only other question.
So Councilmember Haney, great questions. On the slide that I have that shows the wilderness area and Kerr Park, I think it's important to know, and Rocco might be able to help me on this. I'm going to try to outline with my cursor. So this area that I'm outlining is...
You can see it on the screen, Brian.
Oh, sorry. Oh. It looks really good on my screen. So,
Rocco's got the laser.
okay. So now Curtis won't be able to see this, but, oh shoot. Okay, there we go.
I can see the map, but
Okay, so this is the wilderness area, but Rocco, most of the effort is going to be over here, which is far away from Kerr Park. I mean, this is where the main channel areas are going to be. You have the golf course here.
Correct.
And then you have the Sportsman's Club, so there's really not much attention on the Sportsman's Club.
No, there's none.
Because all the effort will be, here are those like the areas that will be inundated. Here's potential trails. We're showing different things here. I wouldn't recommend yet a walking trail right behind the Sportsman's Club. Not everyone's a great shot. I've been out there. So, but that's really what it is. And I mean, Councilmember Henney, we would gladly make calls and ask questions about this. We're happy to do additional research. I don't know if the people that are there would even be able to answer those questions because they would reserve the right to do whatever they want at a later date anyway.
Well, do we bring it up to them? Like, oh, are you sure you're okay with this? Because we have this gun club here. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
Maybe we'll think about it.
And you know what, to touch it again, when they had the suit with the EPA, they updated the facility, and they are now at current standards EPA approval.
Right.
And
And
Something
I
that
would
does
have,
make me feel better about
And
it.
the EPA will move the goalposts if they feel like they need to anyway, so it would be a moot point.
So I think we're all under the same agreement that we don't want anything to happen to the shooting range.
absolutely not.
Yeah. Perfect. So with, so with no further questions from council, do we have public comment, Julie?
I believe we have a public comment from Mrs. Garcia.
Come on up,
Is that
Mrs.
correct?
Garcia.